The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
That situation that happened in Arizona, the National Guard, where they just kind of bum rushed through them. What a crazy scenario to watch on TV.
It's so crazy. And that's America. I was ashamed that we let that happen in America. And frankly, Vincent, I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often, because when you have one Border Patrol agent for every 200 people trying to cross the border, that was a unique situation. That was Texas National Guard standing there. What are you going to do when it's one Border Patrol agent by himself and 200 people come in? You know what the guy has to do? He's got to stand there like a matador and just let him in, because he has no chance. The guy doesn't even carry 200 rounds on him, let alone. It is such, what we saw there was really concerning to me, because it sends a very weak message to the rest of the world. It sends a strong message of how weak we are right now in protecting our own country.
We cut through the partisan talking points. We're not interested in perpetuating fear. We're interested in seeking truth, hearing what's really going on America's borderland. Welcome to Borderland, an Ironclad original. On this conversation, we interview Sheriff Lamb, also known as America's Sheriff. He is the sheriff of Pinal County, Arizona. His views are very conservative at times, and he is also known to be kind of a controversial figure in the border conversation. We gave him the opportunity to really explain himself and what his views are about the border, about the crisis today, and fentanyl. I think you guys will enjoy this conversation. If you wouldn't mind, for the listeners and for the viewers, would you mind just giving a quick bio of yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Sheriff Mark Lamb. I am the sheriff of Pinal County, Arizona. Been the sheriff now I'm in my 8th year. I didn't get into law enforcement early on in life. I was a businessman. I did one ride along and I was hooked, man. I came home that night after seeing some guy get roughed up and tased, and woke my wife up and said, hey, I'm going to be a cop. And since then, I've been in almost 2 decades now in law enforcement. Last 8 years as the sheriff. And if you don't know, Pinal County is between Phoenix and Tucson. We are not on the border. We are 52 miles off the border on the southern end, where the TO reservation, Tohono O'odham Reservation is. And that reservation actually extends into Mexico. And then we're 71 miles off the border, where the I-10 comes into our county. 600 employees, budget of over 60 million, and 5,400 square miles. So that's about the size of the state of Connecticut. But look, I'm no politician. I'm just a patriot who loves God, family, freedom, the Constitution, and the rule of law. And that's why I do what I do.
I love it. And, you know, the crazy coincidence behind it is that when I first got off active duty, I moved to Pinal County and I became a prison guard right there at the private prisons in Florence. And when I was applying for the Border Patrol, I was hoping and praying I'd get Casa Grande Station, but that didn't happen. What most people probably listening don't realize is that one of the big drug smuggling routes is through that Casa Grande, that 8 freeway, but as well as the 10, correct?
That's right. So Pinal County, most people say, well, you're not on the border. Well, first of all, like under Trump's administration, the previous administration, we had more apprehensions at times through the deserts than the border counties did. And then over the last 3 years, it has really changed. We're in the Tucson sector. So the Tucson sector, Casa Grande Station, that station is in our county. But the Tucson sector is Cochise County, Santa Cruz County, Pima County, and Pinal County. Even though we're not on the border, they treat us like a border county. But everybody who comes across the southern border, like Cochise, in the Tucson sector, which, by the way, is where the majority of the gotaways come in, anybody that comes in, any people, any drugs, they eventually almost always have to go through Pinal County to get to Phoenix, which is the distribution hub for what the people and the drugs in this country. So Pinal County, while we're not on the border, we play an integral role in what is going on, which is exactly why Casa Grande has a substation there, because of the trafficking that comes through our county.
Absolutely. And the other tie-in is that my brother's brother-in-law, or my brother, I'd say, Sammy used to work for Pinal County, and he was on the SWAT team.
Yeah.
And so my family's worked directly with you guys, and obviously our friend Matt, as well as your deputy, your deputy sheriff. So there's a lot of tie-in between us, and so I'm really excited to have you on here. I've seen in recent years you become a lot more vocal with the border conversation, which we all know the border conversation has become more public and has become more of an issue in recent years. What is it like currently in Arizona from your position where you're at, and what are you seeing the difference from what in the past and now, and why is it such a concern now?
To the point of being, involved in this conversation a lot, I've had a lot of media sources say to me, well, why are you so political? And I said, look, I'm not political. I'm having to respond to actions or inactions of the government, regardless of who's in there. When they do stuff, it has an impact on our communities. It has an impact on the border. And, as sheriffs, we're forced to stand up and say, hey, look, this isn't right, or this is what's going on. And so that's why it becomes an integral piece to it. What is happening currently in our county is, we're struggling with the amount of, with the border issue. The whole country is like, I go all over the place. It took a while for it to permeate throughout the rest of the country. But it's definitely permeated throughout the rest of the country. And to answer your question of what has changed, for decades, what we saw was predominantly people coming from Mexico. And then if I were to have a bar graph and show you the bar graph, the majority of the bar graph would be people from Mexico, and they would come in, some seasonal, some not, come in, work, and then they would go back home and then come back. And that happened for decades. And then at the very top of that bar graph, you'd have something what the Border Patrol, calls OTMs, other than Mexicans. And so now what is the real difference is why it's different than what we've been used to dealing with in Arizona is that is flip-flop. Now what we're seeing is predominantly people coming in from other countries, 170 different countries, many of them, majority of them military-age men coming from countries in Africa like Sudan or Mauritania, which has become the leading breeding ground for Al-Qaeda. They're coming from Syria, the Middle East. They're coming from Haiti. They're coming from Brazil, Ecuador. They're coming from Russia, Ukraine. They're coming from China. They're coming from all over. And so when you ask what's different, I would say part of it is the indifference to the rule of law, but a real part of it is just how that dynamic has changed from what used to be predominantly people coming from Mexico, and we kind of knew what that was. Now it's predominantly people from all over the world that the cartels are making money off of. And then at the same time, the drugs have increased to include fentanyl as well.
Has fentanyl increased in Arizona?
Oh, absolutely. Look, meth is still one of the biggest things in Arizona, but fentanyl's right there. It's increased to the point where recently the cost of fentanyl pills was down to 10 cents a pill. It's probably stabilized now at about 50 cents a pill. But that goes to show you just how what the supply is in Arizona. And so, but I think meth still leads the way for us in deaths, drug-related deaths. But fentanyl poisonings, we're experiencing it just like every other state is.
I excuse my ignorance. I had no idea it cost that cheap to buy fentanyl. That's insane. Super
cheap. And then, we find a lot of fentanyl powder too. For example, we got information that a guy was shipping fentanyl powder. So my detectives go and we sit on the post office, and sure enough, the dude shows up, sends a package off. We go in, we intercept the package, find that it's a kilo of fentanyl powder. And so the next day we serve a search warrant on a house in Eloy and on a house in Arizona City, kind of close by. You kind of know it's right off the I-10, so through one of our trafficking corridors. And so we go and serve a search warrant. We recover 2 more kilos of fentanyl powder and 6 kilos of cocaine. We think we hit him on a down spot. We expected for him to have more, but we couldn't wait. And just to put it into perspective for those people out there listening, 1 kilo, they estimate can make about 1 million fentanyl pills. So just taking those 3 kilos off from that guy had a huge impact. But that we understand that guy was sending about 30 kilos a month all throughout the country, predominantly to Connecticut, New York, Nebraska, and one other place.
I like that you said that, they've made this subject political, someone who has a heart for the Border Patrol. I got very frustrated when the media turned this subject, or at least the career field, into a political swing, right? You'd shift people left or right, however you wanted to see the Border Patrol. Either they were the bad guys or they were the good guys. It doesn't matter. But it made it unfair for the career field. And it made it unfair for the agents, boots on the ground, who are law enforcement officers who are trying to uphold a law and trying to uphold whatever policies in place at the time. And sometimes I have conversations with people on here and they're all emotionally invested into the political argument of it, but not the facts of the matter, right? Not the facts of policy, but not so much that they lean too heavy one direction emotionally. And it makes for just a hard conversation, because this isn't a political subject as much as it is just the facts of our nation, correct?
That's right. And look, I just try to present the facts. Yes. Am I a conservative? Do I stand for conservative values? Yes. I don't hide that from anybody. I believe in protecting my people first and foremost. And when I say protecting my people, it includes Republicans, Independents, Democrats. It doesn't, like, we don't care about party politics when we're trying to protect you. Or furthermore, when we're trying to protect people that are victims of the cartels, people who have been trafficked in here. I keep hearing this term like, oh, well, it's humane to have an open border. No, there's nothing humane about it. I mean, when you see that 8 of 10 women are being raped that are coming across, the men are being extorted, children are being used as pawns, children are being trafficked in, they're being put in the hard labor trade here in America, they're being put in the sex trade. Statistic, the government doesn't know where about 100,000 of those, that's what they've admitted. They don't know where about 100,000 of those children are, which you and I both know they are likely back into the hands of the same cartels that trafficked them in. There's nothing humane about any of that. There's nothing humane about leaving people for dead in the deserts, which the cartels do, or killing people because they didn't listen to the cartels, or they didn't pay the cartels when they came across, or when they leave. We had a woman we had to go pull out of the desert the other day. When we got there, she was dead. So we lifted her body out of the mountains that the cartels had left behind. Or the woman who has a baggie full of pills, 50 pills. And in there we asked her, what are these pills? She said, well, when I was going to cross the border, I knew I'd be raped multiple times. These are morning after pills. Where do we get to in the country where we put politics in front of people? And then recently I was speaking at ASU in front of the Thunderbird School of Global Management. And the room was predominantly people probably liberally persuaded or Democrats. And I was in there, and I was one of the few conservatives on the panel. We had a Dreamer, we had a Democrat congressman, and we had the head of the Hispanic Arizona Chamber of Commerce, and she was a Republican. But politics, when we were having that conversation, it really didn't come into politics, didn't come into play. We were talking about the issues that we're dealing with as a state, as a country, as people. And I kept referring to military-age men coming across. And at the very end, this lady comes up to me and she says, well, I don't like you using the term military-age men. And I said, well, ma'am, what would you like me to use? And she goes, well, what do you mean by military-age men? I said, well, in our country, you can join between 18 and 37 years old. So if I were to tell you, I'd say probably 18 to 35. And she says, well, why can't you use working age men? And I said, well, I know kids who are 15 who work, and I know 85-year-olds who work. I don't think that really captures the demographic we're dealing with. She said, well, what about young men? I said, I can't say young men either, because you're going to think I'm talking probably 25 or younger. And that doesn't capture it either. I said, ma'am, I get that you don't like the term, but the most descriptive term for the people that we're coming in contact with is military-age men, because they're of the age where they could join the military in their country, or if they can't here because they're not citizens. And she goes, well, I don't like that. And I said, I get it, ma'am. I understand, but that's the term we have to use. She said, well, I also don't like the term invasion. And I said, well, let me give you the definition of invasion. The definition of an invasion is an incursion of a large group of people into a sphere or place of activity, or an unwanted intrusion into somebody's domain. I said, ma'am, I get that you don't like it, but that's exactly by definition what it is. And it wouldn't matter whether it's military-age men, whether it's families or all children or dogs. I would call it an invasion. If we had millions of dogs, we'd say there's an invasion of dogs at the southern border, or there's an invasion of children, or there's an invasion of families. In this particular case, it's predominantly military-age men. So when I refer to it being an invasion of military-age men, that's really what it is. I mean, just by definition, take the politics out of it. I'm just trying to give you a grasp, a visual snapshot of what's happening down there. And then you can take and apply it to whatever political ideologies you have. But I think it's important for you to hear the facts from me. And I'm in the business of delivering the facts that the average politician doesn't have to deliver.
Yeah. No, I hear you on that. The word it's funny how these words that we use to identify things have become weapons almost. And as much as you're using it in the factual term of how you describe it, some people use it as fear mongering. Some people use it to try and create more fear or and that's unfortunate because some people can't handle that kind of information, and it actually does turn into almost chaos in their own world. This subject can be like that. Some people feel that it's so out of control. They're terrified. They're so nervous. And I'm not saying it's not out of control. We all see it's out of control currently. But the sad part is people like, I would say my wife, right? She's like, is it an invasion? Are they coming? Are they going to kill us? I'm like, whoa. Relax on the term invasion. There's a lot of people coming through, but it doesn't mean they're attacking us directly right now. You know what I mean? I'm not also oblivious to the idea that there's potential threats that are coming across that border daily that we have no idea who they are. We know the gotaways, right? So there is potential threats that might not have good ideas for America. And so that has to be in the back of our heads as a concern. That's why this whole situation is kind of fascinating. When you and I see the potential threat that comes across, someone else sees an asylum case, and they can't for some reason differentiate the two, and they can't have two ideas running at the same time. They just choose one to run with because they're most invested in that idea. The political asylum cases, right? Look, you and I know if there's someone out there being abused, someone out there in a country that's not doing so well, they're going to come to America because they want the opportunity of what America presents to them. So I'm not going to say they shouldn't. I'm going to say they should. The hard part is the way the policies are put in place now, they could come through any way and still get the same options. When someone wants to come to this country legally, they have to wait 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years at times. And so the situation we have on the border now, and excuse me for just you and I, you already, I've seen all your stuff. I know, Sheriff Lamb, but they have circumvented a system through a loophole that is unfortunate because it makes this whole situation that much more challenging.
That's right. And I was speaking at that group that night, and I said, look, for all of those people who are trying to come here illegally, you have a bunch of line jumpers. You have people that have jumped the line. And just to put into perspective, I've heard the lowest percentage I've heard is 75%, but I've also heard as high as 90% of the asylum claims. You know, all these people say, well, they're coming here because they're claiming asylum. First of all, you know, they should be claiming asylum in the first country they get to. Now, that's not a hard set law. I used to say it was, and I had somebody come up and correct me, and I took that correction. I went back and looked into it, and she was right. So I removed a video that I had, but there is a kind of an understanding for the most part that you usually would, if you're claiming asylum, you get to a country that's safe and then you would try to claim asylum there. We have people coming through 5, 6, 7 countries, you know, to get here to this country. And then they're making an asylum claim. The majority of these asylum claims, as low as 75%, as high as 90%, will be rejected when they go to court and they actually have time to sit in front of a judge and the judge hears their case will be rejected. This is their numbers. And then they're going to have to be removed from the country. The problem is they're giving these people now dates as far out as 2032. That's 8 years from now. Pretty soon it's going to be 10 years from now. There's a backlog in the courts of between 3 and 5 million cases that they have to hear. How in the world are we ever going to hear those numbers? And so when you talk asylum, just understand the majority of these asylum cases are not legitimate asylum cases and will be overturned. This is where the Remain in Mexico program came in. The Remain in Mexico program, while it wasn't fair to Mexico, was saying, hey, when you claim asylum, you're going to stay in Mexico or whatever country you came from until your court date comes up, and then your case will be heard. And then if you're heard and you're given permission, you'll be granted asylum into this country. Now what we're doing is we're just letting people come. And not only that, we're going even further and we're subsidizing a lot of these people with money. We're subsidizing many of them with housing, with
when you
food.
say we, who's the we subsidizing?
Thank you for clarifying that. That's we, the taxpayer. And the taxpayers are doing it via, we're paying our taxes. The government then takes those taxes. A lot of those Shelter in Place Act, a lot of this money coming from government sources goes to these NGOs, these non-governmental organizations. Non-governmental organizations are 501c3s. While some of them have good intentions, many of them, and the way they're doing it, because they get so much money, some of them over $100 million a year in grant funding. They are aiding and abetting in the trafficking of human beings, encouraging people to come here, because as long as they're coming here, their NGOs are getting more of our tax dollars. So when I say we, the taxpayer, are subsidizing a lot of what's going on in this country. And I think a lot of Americans are waking up to it. I know it's hard not for people to hear this and not see that I'm just trying to be political. I'm not. I'm laying out the landscape for you of what we see every day. And then you can make your educated guesses or decisions as to whether you like what's currently going on or not. But that, and just to prove my point, in the border bill that they tried to pass recently, there was $2.3 billion that was going to be allocated to NGOs assisting in those people coming into this country. There was another over $9 billion that was going to the Global Assistance Fund through the State Department, which would eventually end up in the hands of, let's say, the UN. And many of those funds were being used for the same thing. The UN admitted that they had used $1.6 billion in the way of gift cards and cash to 248 different NGOs that were aiding in the people coming into this country, bringing them to our border, or even helping them beyond the border as well.
That's I know there's NGOs out there, and I don't even know where they get their money. So I imagine you're not wrong on that, but that's just kind of hard to hear, to think about. Much as we're paying taxes, it's eventually getting funneled into NGOs that are assisting in the efforts of what's currently happening. That's what.
Well, and just so people can know, you can go to these NGOs, these charities, and you can see where the majority of their funding comes from, and you'll be able to see if they receive federal grant dollars, federal funds, is their primary source. A lot of these NGOs we deal with down here, almost 90+% of what they get is coming from federal dollars, federal grants, not from private donors, not from companies that believe in their cause, rather than they're coming from federal grants. And everybody knows every dollar that the federal government gives away is our tax dollars. And so these are hard-earned tax dollars that many Americans do not want to allocate to that, but the government is allocating those monies to it. And it really creates a problem for us, because we're trying to fix the problem. And then you have these people right on the border that are intercepting, and they're taking these people and coddling them and bringing them in. And look, I get the humanity side of it. There's nobody more humane than Border Patrol agents, than law enforcement. We're the ones that are putting our lives on the line, going out and rescuing people out of the desert and trying to stop them and get them out of the hands of the cartels while they're being trafficked into this country, while they're being extorted, or while they're being forced to carry drugs or any other thing. We're the ones we put our humanity on the line, and we treat them very well, and we try to give them all the care that they can get. But at the same time, we have to uphold the rule of law and balance that with our humanity. And that's a tough job that we're in.
Yeah. I want to go back to the part where you said some people are getting 8 years notice to appears. And those who are listening and watching probably don't know why that's even significant, but the way our immigration policies are currently, if those individuals probably meet an American citizen, have a child here in America, get married, now there's another system in place where they can gain citizenship through a legal matter, since they're already here on the pretenses of their original entry. So when they can start applying for citizenship through, or at least becoming a permanent resident, because of the fact of they get a sponsor through love or a child and so on and so forth. So it becomes another loophole within the system of another loophole. And that is just a way people are kind of circumventing the legal way of becoming a citizen. And so there's a lot of layers to this. When someone claims political asylum, previously to when I used to work as a border agent, there was a list of certain countries. There was like 23 countries on the list that were accepted as a true asylum case. And at that point, they still have to be in holding. And once they're in holding, they wait until time to see an immigration judge. And then that immigration judge still makes a determination of their case. Currently, if I remember correctly, you can please quote me or correct me on this, but even Mexican citizens are allowed to claim political asylum at this moment, because whatever policy is in place. Is that correct?
Look, they're letting everybody, basically what they're saying is if you can articulate a credible fear, and the cartels are coaching people up as to what those credible fears are. This is actually one of the arguments against calling it an invasion from some local law enforcement, because they say that if they call it an invasion, you are actually providing credence or to the articulable, or if you call it, let me rephrase that, the terrorist organizations. If you declare the cartels terrorist organizations, then what happens is all the people on the southern end in Mexico can potentially claim a credible fear because of the cartels. And they can say, look, I'm a victim of, I was afraid that I was going to die. And so I came here.
It becomes valid now.
Right,
now it becomes valid in their argument.
The arguments against saying that calling these guys terrorists. But you're right. Look, they're not really turning anybody back. If you're coming across and you're claiming asylum, they're letting you stay. And even furthermore, take a look at the news. These Venezuelans, now they're saying we're not going to send the Venezuelans back. Well, then these Venezuelans, they'll come commit. And I'm saying I'm just saying, I'm using some of the ones in the example, high profile cases. They commit a crime and then they're being released back to the street. And the average American says, what the hell? What's going on? Well, it's because they've got paperwork where they've made an asylum claim and they can't send them back to their country. And partly because this administration has also said, we're not sending people back to Venezuela. And so it creates a real problem. And Vince, you kind of touched on it.
Massive complexities. And that's why I enjoy having these conversations, because I think we get to kind of slowly unpack this for other people. But Venezuela currently is not accepting any of their immigrants who left the country. So there's the president himself said, no, thank you, and will not allow any to come back in. So that's a problem. That's a problem. We do find, so the system currently in place, if say the Border Patrol runs fingerprints and they can identify that this individual has a previous history that is something that we don't want in this country, murder, rape, whatever the case, and most of the time we can actually send them back to their country. That's when we do immediate deportation. Most of the nation probably doesn't know that Border Patrol is still deporting individuals that have situations like that. There's all these other ones that have kind of the loophole system where they've kind of fallen through the cracks that is not being able to be managed, or being managed the way it's supposed to in their case. But if someone does roll fingerprints and they do find that they're in the indents, right, or the ident system, and identify that they do have previous criminal history, they will get deported. But countries like Venezuela currently is not receiving anyone from their country. So that becomes a problem. Same goes for countries like any of the countries out in like Russia or Ukraine, whatnot. As soon as they remove all of their personal identification, and they do that right when they get into Mexico, they land into Mexico and they throw their passports, they throw their identification. Those countries will not receive them if they can't prove that they are a citizen of that country. So it's another loophole in their system that they won't even take them back. Nope, I'm good. Yeah, you can't prove. So all these little loopholes and all these systems in every country is slightly different. It makes it extremely challenging for America to kind of get ahead of this, because policies that are currently in place don't support us or don't support these causes. The Border Patrol themselves, I'll clarify, Border Patrol still does the same job. They still apprehend individuals in the border and they still process them. It's the process that happens after apprehension that has changed, and that is based on a policy. And so when most people want to say the Border Patrol is not doing anything, it's kind of like, you were quoted saying that Border Patrol is handcuffed, and I would say like in the sense of they still do their job, but after apprehension, policies have shifted.
That's right.
I was jumped a few years ago at a gas station. What are some easy to use self-defense techniques?
What is the most cost-effective way to make sure my home is secure?
What would happen if there was a global internet or cellular outage? What is your suggestion for comms?
What should I do if I hear shots ringing out?
Or what I should do if there's a major terrorist attack.
How is your faith tied in to being a protector?
Is there a moral case for taking a life?
What is your recommendation on critical EDC?
What should I have? What's the best?
What should I do?
What does that look like?
What would you recommend?
Is there anything I could do?
Border Patrol, their job is to secure the border. And what they've become is now processing centers Now the Border Patrol agents, you can fly along the southern border and you're hard pressed to find a Border Patrol agent, if you see one, out in the border areas doing what they're supposed to be doing, border protection. And how can they, when you're allowing 10,000 people to come in a day? We're averaging in the Tucson sector, just those apprehensions are in between typically 10 and 15,000. It dipped the last few weeks, but we're typically in between about 10 and 15,000 individuals coming into the Tucson sector per week. When you break that down, that's over a couple thousand people a day that the Border Patrol is having to process. Let me tell you, it's going to take all hands on deck to process these people. And even with that, the Border Patrol chiefs and guys there have admitted to me, they're like, Sheriff, we're only able to vet about 5% of the people that are coming in right now, properly vet them because of that. And the other thing you touched on, Vince, is they do these ID dumps. They all dump their IDs on the other side of the border because then they can claim they're from whatever country, and there's no way for us to verify. We don't have any ID on them. We're basically just taking their word. And one more thing to really cement in what you said is, on the average, Border Patrol is apprehending about, and CBP is apprehending about 40,000 people a year that have either committed crimes in the United States and been removed, and now they're trying to come back, or that are wanted by law enforcement for crimes they commit in this country when they go through that processing thing. And one more thing, one more point is them not taking their people back. Look, people don't like to hear this, but we're not getting the cream of the crop from these countries. Many of these countries are emptying their prisons. They're legitimately emptying prisons and letting those people go. We're getting people that lived in poverty in their own countries that were extremely impoverished, and now they're coming here. And I get it. You and I are the same, and every American I talk to, we want people to come make a better life for themselves. We just need them to follow the process that's in place, the legal process, so it doesn't break our system while we are trying to bring people in and offer them the American dream. We have to make sure that it doesn't break the process. What we are not getting typically, the majority of them are not doctors, lawyers, highly educated from other countries. We're typically getting people that were on the impoverished level in their country, and now they're becoming the impoverished level in our country. And it makes things very difficult for us. And local law enforcement ends up paying the price. I mean, the federal government is not there when we have to go clean up the mess of the fentanyl poisoning at somebody's house, or when we have to show up to an accident involving somebody that was not in this country, or a murder or a rape, or any of these things. We clean up the mess after that. The federal government doesn't get those 911 calls. We end up getting them, but we have no control over how it came in on the front end. And I just want to express my heartfelt support and my anger for Border Patrol that they have been thrust into this position, and they are trying to do the best they can. And please don't ever, I'm the first to defend Border Patrol and the men and women of Border Patrol. The DC level, no. But when we talk about the line level troops, these are men that put on that badge every day, knowing that they're going to work in a situation that they have no control over, that is not what they signed up for, and yet they're still going out and doing their job. And so please thank one of your Border Patrol agents, because they're in a tough situation. They're doing a damn good job with the situation they're in.
Thank you for that. Recently we saw the news in Texas where the law enforcement are trying to push the opportunity for them to arrest illegal migrants that are walking or that they are apprehending at the border. I know some about it. I'd love to know more about it, because I know Arizona pushed this previously to that as well. How do you see something like that working, a system like that working? I know what happened. So here's what I learned from the Texas version is they come across the Texas DPS, whoever apprehends them, they put them into holding, they roll their fingerprints, do the same thing, and then eventually they have to deport them. But they don't have a system to deport them. So they were handing them back to the Border Patrol. So how is that supposed to work? How does this, in the perfect scenario, how does this system work in your idea?
So I think what Texas is really trying to fight for is their ability to protect their borders, to protect their community. I don't know that it's so much about them wanting to get involved into the immigration aspect of it, which, first of all, by the way, for any of your listeners out there, immigration is not in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 talks about Congress having the authority to create uniform rules for naturalization. That's the closest it gets. Immigration is a term and a concept that really has been given to Congress by the Supreme Court and by other courts. I think that is why the Supreme Court and the Fifth Circuit are struggling, trying to define where the immigration piece ends and where the state has the right to protect their borders from people coming into the country. I really think that's Arizona's law was a kind of more about immigration, saying if you were in the country illegally, then we could arrest you. First of all, my jail would fill up in a hot minute if we did that. But I also don't think that we should just be allowing people to break the law with no impunity either, because there is a federal law that says you can't come into this country illegally. On your first offense, you're sent back. If you do it again, you could be facing jail time. And that's Title VIII. So we don't have any authority in Arizona or Texas. There is no state law that gives us the authority to arrest somebody for being in the country illegally. We can only arrest people if they commit a state crime. And if it's determined that they're found to be in the country illegally, if we work with ICE, which we are, we're a 287G jail, which means we are an ICE facility in the sense that we can then work with ICE, contact ICE and say, ICE, we have this guy, he committed a crime, and now we think he's illegal. We've gone through your system. It looks like he's illegal. Then they can say, okay, we're going to put a detainer on him. And when he's done with his time in your county, then we'll come pick him up. They're not even picking up they're not putting detainers, and they're not picking them up anymore. So that's one piece of it.
So if they don't pick him up, do you just have to release him at that point?
Yes.
So the crazy thing is that that now it's put onto you, right? Like you have to make a decision. Either your jail hold him longer. That's crazy. Okay.
You know, the courts we can't hold them any longer than what the court has said we can. For example, and people are going to hate hearing this too, because if we pull a car over and the driver has 5 guys in camouflage clothes and carpet shoes, clearly they just came into the country. They're here illegally. If Border Patrol cannot come pick them up, we have to let them go. Well, we can charge the driver for trafficking them and driving them. There's a state law now in Arizona that gives us that authority. But everybody else, we have to let them go. I can only hold them for about 30 minutes to an hour, a reasonable amount of hold time based on whether Border Patrol can come and get them or not. If the Casa Grande substation is busy and they can't come get them, now most of the time Casa Grande substation can come get them, and they're really good about it. So it doesn't happen very often, but if it were to happen, we'd have to let them go.
Yeah,
so,
if it's a busy night and agents are everywhere, they're processing people. Yeah. And there's some areas that are 2.5, 3 hours away from any civilization. Right. So,
and Arizona 10 years ago in 2010, tried to fix this with SB 1070. And remember, that situation was very different. We didn't have tens of thousands of people coming every week. We had, 500,000, 700,000, as low as 400,000 in 2020. Now we're at over 2 million a year. And so that piece has changed. But then they passed this law. Arizonan voters voted for it. They passed it. Then it goes up to the Obama administration challenged it. It went to the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit ruled that the federal government has sole authority over immigration. What I wish Arizona would have fought at that point was not the immigration piece. I wish they would have fought the state protection right, the ability to defend your state and protect your state, which is going back to my original talking point. I think that's what Texas is fighting for. They're saying if you, the federal government, don't defend our borders, we have the right to defend our borders against an invasion. As a state, we have a responsibility to defend our citizens. As the state of Texas, the Republic of Texas. And so I think that is really the fight. And I think that's why you're seeing some real unclarity, some fogginess in this whole situation. And I think ultimately the court's going to have to rule, because in the Constitution, it says in the 10th Amendment, anything that is not reserved in the Constitution for the federal government becomes a state right. And if immigration was never reserved in it, and it was given to them by the Supreme Court, and by now the Supreme Court's going to have to address that issue. There's a lot to it. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But I love it. I love that Texas is challenging it. I think that Arizona's the concept was good. I think this is an opportunity for Arizona to readdress it and really kind of gain control. I think the states should have the ability and the right to protect themselves. The immigration piece, I think, is ultimately going to end up in the hands of the federal government, which I think we're all okay with. But the piece of protecting our states is an important piece. And I think the states reserve that right because it was not enumerated in the Constitution as a right reserved to Congress. Only the rules for naturalization were.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you think soon Arizona would try and do the same thing?
I do. Maybe. It depends, because you're going to have your state take up that mantle. So the governor and the county or the attorney general would have to be the ones that are going to take that up. And right now, politically, I don't know that that's going to align with our governor or our attorney general. I don't know that they're going to take that up. So they may address that ruling from the Ninth Circuit just because it's probably going to come into play into Texas's case.
Yeah. As earlier we were talking about that there is about 1.5 million coming into America legally using the legal channels, going through the legal process. And most of those are highly educated doctors and so on and so forth. And I wanted to make sure we stated that because, there's two sides of this story, and the legal immigration side is still happening. Those who think we're just not allowing people in is not true. The process is long. It is taxing on these individuals, but the process still exists. The process is still doing its job. I think a year before that, we were closer to the 2 million allowed in legally. And so those are we can't talk about one without the other sometimes in this conversation because people tend to just think we're just attacking one side or the other. I think it's fair to mention that.
That's a great point. And to that point, and in fairness to those people who paid that, it is total in true government fashion. It's so screwed up that these people will go 15 years, 17 years where they cannot get legal. My nephew married a Panamanian girl, and then they were here in America. They had a baby here. So the baby's American, not just by birthright of the father, but born in America. And they go back to Panama. COVID hits. She loses her visa and could not get back in. Married to an American child, could not get back, had a visa, could not get back in. That's the type of broken, uncommon sense systems that exist right now. And we should put a much more common sense plan in place, something a lot more attainable for those good people that really could have benefit our society. And they really bring a lot of expertise and ability to the table. I think it'd be really good to have a system. It's part of the reason I'm running for the Senate now is because I'm sick and tired of them just passing it. Every 2 years, we're talking about immigration again because it's a good fundraising topic. And I think Congress and Senate continue to fail the American people by not establishing a real common sense, uniform rules that people can know and get their job done. Lawyers make a tremendous amount of money off of these poor people that just want to get a residency here or a visa. The lawyers benefit and the people don't.
Yeah, absolutely. I've tried to explain this to people that they want to argue this topic. I'm like, go look 30 plus years. There's been no significant change to our immigration system. There's been scrape the frosting off the top, put a new coat on and call it good. And that's unfortunate because now we're really starting to see this come to a collapsing point where everyone's starting to get frustrated. There's good people trying to do it the right way. It's taking way too long. People like your nephew's wife, just because she came out of status because of COVID, you're telling me there's no way she can get status back so she can come back to America. Things like that happen every day. I just had an interview with a woman who supports veterans and trying to get them back who've been deported. We have over 400 veterans who've been deported because our system failed them while they were activated going overseas. They never pushed the needle for them. And there's several from Arizona who are currently deported into those borders, and they can't get back because the system is broken.
And another thing, you're exactly right. And one more thing to that. We have communities in Texas and in Arizona, Nogales, Arizona being one of those communities. Nogales, Arizona, probably 30,000 people. Nogales, Mexico, probably 500,000 people. But if you were to look above, if you didn't see the wall, you would see it as one giant community. Not only that, the majority of the produce, vegetables, and a lot of the green produce that we consume is coming from Mexico into Nogales and into America. And when you don't have common sense systems in place, the border gets all jammed up. The normal trade that those communities benefit off of and thrive on, that's their jobs, or those people that live in Nogales, Mexico, and then they come across and work and benefit our communities in this country only to go home. It's a 2-hour wait every day for them to come in because the Sentry system's so jacked up. And the border patrol guys and CBP are so tasked trying to find drugs and the illegals. That's the consequences of a broken system has. It's not just about people. It's not just about drugs. It's about our economy. It's about cities and communities along those borders that live off of each other. Mexico and the United States, those sides, we trade with Mexico. Mexico, frankly, should be our #1 trade partner. We should take our products from China, put them in Mexico. We are much better off engaging Mexico as a partner. But to do that, you've got to fix the border stuff, or else we're always going to have problems. It's going to affect our trade with Mexico. It's going to affect our ability to go to the store and buy your vegetables and your leafy greens and all these things. The average American just has no idea just all the pieces that go along with having a common sense border protection plan and immigration plan. I get the two are intertwined, but at the same time, they are kind of two separate things. And that's why there's two separate government agencies. While they fall under DHS, there is CBP, Customs and Border Protection. They handle the ports. And then there is Border Patrol, which handles the outside of the ports for the most part, making sure that people don't cross into this country illegally. So
absolutely. Let me ask you about something real quick. That situation that happened in Arizona, the National Guard, where they just kind of bum rushed through them. What a crazy scenario to watch on TV.
It's so crazy. And that's America. I was ashamed that we let that happen in America. And frankly, Vincent, I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often, because when you have one Border Patrol agent for every 200 people trying to cross the border, that was a unique situation. That was Texas National Guard standing there. What are you going to do when it's one Border Patrol agent by himself and 200 people come in? You know what the guy has to do? He's got to stand there like a matador and just let him in, because he has no chance. The guy doesn't even carry 200 rounds on him, let alone. It is such, what we saw there was really concerning to me, because it sends a very weak message to the rest of the world. It sends a strong message of how weak we are right now in protecting our own country.
You know, just on the training standpoint and, some of the stuff, obviously I've been a highly trained individual. I've worked in the prison systems. I've worked in Border Patrol. I've worked in the military. The way you kind of manage these big groups is very different than what the National Guard is taught, or at least those MOSs. And so it's kind of unfortunate. The whole scenario was just something that you see in a movie, in a TV show. It was definitely unfortunate. And in all honesty, it was extremely dangerous. It could have had a very bad outcome if those individuals were coming with real and bad intentions. They were just like, let me get through, boom, just bulldoze them. But there could have been a whole different scenario where a lot of Americans would have been dead because of those individuals. That's how dangerous that scenario was. And watching it gave me the chills. I'm like, oh my goodness. I mean, we're fortunate that's just what happened, because this could have been dangerous for our own people.
Yeah. And look, I don't want to go to fearmonger, because we talked about that.
Yeah.
While I have done that before, I also think it's important to understand just really what we're facing. And most people have no idea how powerful the cartels are. Their weaponry that they have, the amount of people that work for them, and frankly, those people, they either work for plata o plomo. A lot of these guys don't have a choice. They either have to work for them, and so I'm concerned that you could easily see the cartels. Now, do I think that that's a viable threat right now? No, because cartels are making so much money. But to not understand just how volatile that situation is just over the other side of the border between the warring cartels amongst each other, the amount of money that's being traded and changing hands with the human trafficking and the drug trafficking. I think Americans need to be very cognizant of the active threat that exists on the other side. While I don't think it's going to come over right now, there are other threats that we've already talked about, people we don't know who. Right. And I would love to talk about the fentanyl piece, but yeah, I think it's important that people understand the cartels are brutal. They're well equipped, and many of them are motivated because they don't want to let the cartels down. They might die if they don't do their job.
Yeah, you mentioned Plato Plomo. That's for those listening, silver or lead. Take the payment or take the lead, get killed. And so most people are kind of backed in a corner to have to do what the cartel tells them to, or they'll be killed. And that's very common. There's documentaries on that. This isn't just fear mongering. This is the truth of what happens in the Mexican side of the border. It's funny. I was just in El Paso the other day, and I go often to the borders. I videotape it. I kind of, I did some photos of some stuff with a couple of friends, and on the other side of the fence, it's a highly activity area, and about an $80,000, $70,000 razor was filled with individuals who have ski masks on, and I was like, okay, so just my experience, those are cartel because of the value of the vehicle in its own and what they're wearing and concealing their face. But the most odd thing happened that day. And again, I have a lot of experience in this world, so I knew exactly what was happening. I just kind of was watching. But another individual wearing the same exact face cover, same exact eye covers, was on the American side on a little motorcycle himself. And he was just kind of scouting for them, essentially. And he kind of did a loop, came back. I was able to observe his hands. Hands were tatted. Looks like prison tats. Looks like street tats, right? Some kind of gang affiliation of some sort. And then he says, "Hey, man, you guys be careful over there. Those guys are the cartel." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then he goes, "Yeah, man, they're dangerous. So just stay away from there. And yeah, just be safe." I'm like, "Okay, cool. Appreciate it, bro." And he drives off. And the guys that were with me are very oblivious to this. And they were like, "What was that about?" It's like, "Oh, he's just the cartel, just on our side." Like they didn't realize that was the scout that actually lives on the American side that works for the cartel. He had the same exact gear on, the same face cover, safe mask, everything. And that guy, as much as he was cartel, he's not an immediate threat to me at that moment, but he easily could have been if I had any kind of heavy posture towards him. That moment right there was just let it pass, right? For me, for the safety of who I was with and everything, there's no point of me doing anything at that moment. But for what it's worth, most people probably don't realize how often that happens in America, that there's scouts everywhere. If there's action on one side of the border, there's some kind of support on the other. And I try to explain that like, that's not a fear monger. That is a reality that like the borders, as much as I love border towns, the culture, the food, everything is beautiful. If you're in a high traffic area that is owned by the cartel, you must know that there's probably a scout on that same side, on the American side, supporting.
Oh, our county is, especially under the previous administration, is littered with scouts. We've arrested many scouts in our mountains. We've rooted them out. I was out with Border Patrol a couple months ago where we saw what looked like a scout load up through a very remote part of the border where they traffic a lot of the meth and the fentanyl through, because Border Patrol has a tough time getting there through Sassabee. And what we did, we saw this little place that looked like a scout hangout, and we dropped the Border Patrol guy down there. He was down there for a good 10, 15 minutes, throwing things up, finding radio batteries, finding all this stuff. And he takes a step, and about 3 feet away from him pops out a guy, two of them, I think, and they just go bolting it down the mountainside. Steep mountain, by the way. These two dudes just started running like two mountain goats down the side of the mountain. But he was that close to him, had been around him for 10, 15 minutes before they actually popped out. So yeah, there's a ton of scouts. And I can fly you in my helicopter right along the border, and I can show you all the scouting locations that are 30, 40, 20, 30 yards off of the wall. These are the cartel scouting locations where they will wait for the people. They'll get them all. It's a staging area for the people that are going to cross the border. They make sure that they've all paid, And then when it's clear, they'll send them across. And so, yeah, scouts is a real thing down here. But as long as you don't impede on their load, their drug load or their people load, you're not a threat. The second you do that, then these people are not about to lose it, because if they lose it, it could mean death to them. If they lose that drug load or that people load, then the cartels could kill them for losing it. So then you become a threat. And if there's only one Border Patrol agent out there or one sheriff's deputy, that could become a very dangerous situation really fast.
Absolutely. Like some of those internet tough guys are always calling out Border Patrol, like, why aren't you doing that? Like, Border Patrol doing everything you can, I promise. But this job is so challenging and so difficult at times. I wish more of the American people would support what they do, and other agencies that work on the border, like the sheriff's departments and others. It's not an easy job with everything that happens. My last question is what are something you'd like to see change in the policy that would help slow us down, mitigate this? I think, it don't matter who the president is, we will always have, these adversaries at the border. We'll always have people trying to enter into this country illegally. They're always going to try and find a way. But what are some things that could probably be implemented that would support and make this a lot safer?
Yeah, here's the ugly truth first. As long as there is a demand for drugs and a demand for human trafficking, a demand for people in the sex trade, a demand for hard labor in this country, we're always going to have a border issue, because the cartels specialize in transnational criminal organizations. And if it means they can make money off of illegal things, then those things are going to be present. So we as Americans got to get right with ourselves. We've got to make ourselves better, bring God back into it, bring the family unity back into it, restore this country to its value system that we used to have. And we need to treat one another with kindness and respect, and eradicate some of these awful, perverse things from our society. And look, I'm speaking as a father who had a son who went through a drug problem. And I can tell you it affects every American family in this country. And if it hasn't affected you, it could eventually affect your family. And so that's the harsh reality, is we've got to curb that behavior. But we certainly cannot dry the bathroom floor. You can mop it all you want, but until you turn off the tub water, you ain't stopping anything. And we've got to turn the tub water off. And the tub water is at the border, whether it's the people that present potentially a terrorist threat. And what I was going to tell you, the greatest terrorist threat to Americans right now, we see things very different. I've been talking about this lately. We as Americans have been conditioned to see terrorism as a bomb going off, or we see it as a plane crashing into a building, or somebody walking into a crowded area with a gun. That's how we've been determined to see terrorists. And a lot of times we see terrorism involving a certain region of the world, and we don't necessarily see terrorism outside of that. I'm here to tell you that the greatest terrorist threat is already upon us. The amount of Americans we're losing every year, the leading cause of death in America amongst the ages of 18 to 45 is fentanyl poisons. Fentanyl has become the leading cause of death. China is bringing the precursors. They're putting it into the hands of the cartels. The cartels are then bringing that across, and we are losing about 100,000 American lives a year. And China has never lifted a single rifle, fired a single shot, but they are having more damage. They are doing more damage on America and the American people than any of our adversaries throughout history have ever done. This is a new type of terrorism. It looks different. It's coming in the way of fentanyl and other dangerous drugs, and they're destroying American lives and killing American lives. And so my hope is that we can start to wake Americans up to that reality, is that is what's claiming more American lives than anything. And I don't want to be an alarmist. I want to fix it. That's part of the reason I want to go back to DC, is because I think I bring some expertise and some know-how and some relationships. And I understand the complexity of all of it. The people that want to come here to make a better life for themselves, the role that the cartels play, the role that the NGOs play, the government, all of this has, you've got to have somebody that kind of understands that. So the long way of saying, what I hope to do is get some common sense, attainable immigration reform in place. People, if they want to come here, we should be able to vet them, and we should be able to give them an ability to work and allow employers to be able to hire them. But if we do it in an orderly fashion, something that we set up. Not only can it weaken the cartels by doing it that way, it also gives us control of what's happening, who's in our country, and we can then turn Border Patrol back out onto the borders and have them do their job, which they're very good at, stopping people from coming to this country illegally. But it's not going to start until Congress and Senate start to really come up with some common sense things. And then we attract the people from the world that we want here, that will make better, that will make great citizens, great neighbors, will contribute a ton to it. And I think those are some of the things we need to do. But the number one threat to America is the border. And day one, it's got to be one of my highest priorities as a senator will be to do what we can to address the border situation while addressing the backside issues of drug addiction and all that as well. And I think really we need somebody that has the experience in the border and law enforcement and the relationships. And frankly, while people may hear this today and say he sounds political, it's not. This is about saving you as Americans, saving us as Americans, saving the country that we love. And it's also saving the people that are being abused by a broken government system and being abused by a cartel who is smart enough to take advantage of that broken government system.
Thank you for listening to Borderland and Ironclad Original. Don't forget to like and share and tell all your friends. We'll see you again next week.